Hey friends, it's been a while. I've been dealing with some pretty severe burnout and depression, and I also, in kind of that vein, wanted to share a content warning for today's podcast. I'm going to be mentioning suicidal ideation as a thing that I have gone through. It's not going to be in extreme detail, but if that bothers you, please consider skipping this week's just because I don't want to upset anybody. If you are still here, welcome. I am E. Prabilski. This is Authority, the podcast where I spill the tea on the publishing industry. And this week, I wanted to talk to you about something that is very personal. And my cat is in the way of everything. Because that's what he does in his spare time, is cause problems. All of his time is spare time, just for that reference. Um, Given that this is June and it's Pride, I wanted to kind of have a brief discussion about some of my journey in the hope that it might help other people with their experiences and help them understand maybe what it's like to go through some of the things I've gone through. Cat again. And so, with that, I kind of wanted to talk about how I realized that I was, in fact, a man. And it's kind of a challenging story because I don't have a one of those happy coming out stories where somebody's partner puts them in opposite gendered clothing and stands them in front of a mirror and says, "Hey, what's your name now?" Not because my partner isn't supportive and loving, but because my relationship with gender was different than that. I first wrote the word man in relation to myself while I was inpatient in a psychiatric hospital this past January. I was there because I was suicidal. I didn't really want to go through it, but I'd spent 24 hours crying. I couldn't stop crying. I couldn't get it out of my head. And I was in so much emotional pain that I just could not breathe, could not function, and I could not. There was no more. And I knew that I was in severe crisis, and so I went. At the encouragement of some of my friends who are experts in that subject. Um, my first day there was mostly recovering from medication that they'd given me to kind of calm me down. Um, the reason I went in, just to be clear, had nothing to do with my gender. I was having life problems with a lot of different things. There were a bunch of crises going on, issues in some of my really close relationships, things that had just kind of pushed me into such dark a place that I could not see a way out. I didn't think there was out. I just thought that there was down or same, and I couldn't handle either of those anymore. After that first day, where I spent the time recovering from the medication they gave me in the emergency room, not because they gave me the wrong thing, but because I respond really hard to that kind of medication and it messes with me for a couple days afterwards. After that, I started writing. I went through so many golf pencils, journaling, and writing that they ended up just giving me a handful of them to carry around in my pocket, and I just had this like never-ending litany back with the desk of like, here's a pencil, because after the first couple they were like, oh yeah, okay, here, just take those. um and I had several lined notebooks, composition notebooks. By the time I was out of there, I had filled a 40-page composition notebook start to finish in handwritten journaling and had taken over several other notebooks with song lyrics and other things I was writing. And during the time there, I learned that they had a guitar that you could borrow. So obviously I did that, and I played until my fingers like blistered. I hadn't played in years, but I played until I couldn't anymore. And I composed during that time because one of the things that my mind likes to do when I'm in really dark places is it immediately starts turning to poetry, which I know sounds trite, and a lot of the poetry is probably not the best, but it does help me explain things that regular prose doesn't. Like there's something about poetry and lyrics that doesn't communicate things the same way that prose does. And I was I was awake late. I don't know what time it was because there are no clocks in the psych ward. That's where the title of this episode comes from, is there are no clocks in the psych ward. And I have no idea what time it was, but it was very late, and I was being allowed to use the guitar past the hours that I was supposed to be allowed to use it. And I was being permitted to be in a room that I wasn't technically allowed to be in at that time of night because they seemed to understand that I wasn't there to wake anybody up or cause problems. I had a song in my brain that I had to get out of my fingers, and I needed to put it down on paper, and that's what I was doing. And while I was doing it, and getting the lyrics down and writing all this stuff, I wrote as part of the lyrics to the song, "Father, do you love this man?" And I told myself at the moment that I wrote it that it was just because it fit the rhythm, and woman didn't, person didn't, like it needed to be a single syllable. And I told myself it was convenient and just made sense. And then I just kind of stopped. And I looked at the word for a while, and I burst out crying. Um, I'd been non-binary for about 4 years or so by that point, maybe five. Because I think it was like 2020-ish, 2021 that came out as non-binary. I don't remember. But it'd been a while, and at the same time, like writing something like that it felt forbidden, like something I couldn't have. And it was beautiful, and it was bitter, and it was awful, and it was great all at the same time. Like it was, I won't say it was a bad experience, but I won't say it was a good one either. It was cathartic, but also very painful. The song that I was working on and wrote, it made everybody in the ward cry. Patients and staff were asking me to play it like over and over again the entire time I was there. I think I played it like 10, 12 times over the next few days. Because people who hadn't heard it yet kept coming to me and asking to hear it, or asking to hear it again because they felt they needed to hear it again. And after that, people kept asking me to sing because am a professional musician and I have a professional singing voice, and so they wanted me to sing because there's really no music, there's very little stimulation there, but you're allowed to sing. So I was doing that, and several people thought it really helped them. And again, with the making people cry, because they'd ask me to sing certain songs, Amazing Grace was pretty popular. I was also doing Linkin Park, Evanescence, stuff like that. Things that I could remember the lyrics of off the top of my head, because I don't remember song lyrics very well without seeing them written out in front of me because I've got memory problems for certain things, and so I sung what I could. Um, anyway, regardless, I haven't played the song since I left the ward, because my guitar needs to be fixed before I can, and I haven't been able to afford to take it to the luthier to have it fixed. It's an acoustic, and the bridge got pulled up some by the strings were left too tight, and I guess it got cold enough that the bridge got pulled. It's not destroyed, but it does need to be fixed. But I haven't been able to afford to do it, so I have not played the song since, which is, I guess, a little bit of the magic because it was a time and a place and a moment, but it's never again and never was before. So maybe there's something in there about that. I don't know. Um, One of the things that I have been doing for the last few years since my autism diagnosis is unmasking. If you are unfamiliar with the term, it's the process described. It's a neurodivergent thing, but it's not exclusive to us, I don't think. I'm sure other people mask, but it's the peeling back the layers of ourselves that we've built up to try and be more presentable to society. Because we try and make ourselves presentable to society, not too much, not too loud, not too interested in these things, not too interested in those things. Trying to fit ourselves into the little boxes that society says we should fit in, and it is a thing that we go through a long time, and unmasking is kind of peeling back those layers, and it comes with a lot of serious emotions. Um, my whole life, for the first 38 years of my life, was about creating somebody the rest of the world could accept. And that's how neurodivergents have to live most of the time, particularly if you're AFAB or a woman. Because female neurodivergence is oftentimes really heavily masked due to societal pressures in ways that male neurodivergence isn't as much. I'm not a woman, but I was one for most of my life. Elizabeth, she was sweet, she was kind, she was quiet, she never really fit in anywhere at all, and always felt that she'd been born wrong. She wanted to be a boy from, like, I remember sitting on the bus at 8, wishing I'd been born a boy. All of her characters were male. She hung out with men because they made more sense and she felt safer with them. And so she kind of just identified herself as a tomboy because that was what we called ourselves back then. This was the early 1990s. So this is, a long time ago. And back then, the only trans exposure I knew of, and it wasn't even really trans exposure, was cross-dressing. So Frankenfurter, Mrs. Doubtfire, things like that in the world where those things existed in media, and it was usually a joke. Not to say that Frankenfurter is not the best. I like Rocky, no disrespect to Rocky Horror, and I love the movie Mrs. Doubtfire. Like, it was great. But I didn't really have a lot of examples of cross-dressing, and the only examples I had of cross-dressing were men to women, not women to men. The closest I ever got to that at that age was Annie Lennox in in Sweet Dreams, because when I saw her, I thought she was a man. I thought she was the most beautiful man I'd ever seen. I didn't learn she was a woman until much later, but that androgyny and that beauty just like struck me. And that was at a young age. It felt right. Um, and I'm not Elizabeth anymore. In the same way, a tree is not the seed that it was born from, or a caterpillar and butterfly are not the same. But I do still love her. She was a good person. She was a sweet kid. And she worked really hard to make everybody like her and was dealt a really raw deal by society. I have nothing against Elizabeth. She was a good person. And I am still her, but I'm also not. Like I said, in the same way that a tree is not its seed and a caterpillar and butterfly are the same but also different. That experience of learning my identity wasn't really as dramatic or inspirational as a lot of the ones you're going to hear. You know, a lot of people talk about these great coming out stories or these horrifying coming out stories. I just wrote the word man on a piece of paper for song lyrics and kind of had a breakdown over it. And gender isn't what put me into my inpatient experience, but my struggles with identity were certainly a significant part of it. My identity not just being gender, but the unmasking thing means peeling back all of the layers and the pieces and the parts to try and figure out who you are underneath who society says you're supposed to be. And that also means confronting a lot of grief and a lot of anger that you weren't allowed to be that person, or that people demanded that you were different to the point where you cut pieces off of yourself and are forced to live in a way that doesn't really represent you. To be clear, my mother's amazing, and my father wasn't disrespectful of that. He was abusive, but not for that reason. It was society, not my parents, trying to turn me into somebody I wasn't. My parents both were really aggressive about me being who I was supposed to be and who I chose to be, but society's pressures are real and intense. The idea of unmasking is it's liberating and it's agonizing, like just about any transformation. And the process of trying to remember who you are and decide who you're gonna be kind of build out of the fragmented pieces of yourself that you may or may not remember is painful, and that's what sent me into inpatient, along with a bunch of interpersonal things and life things that happened kind of all at once, and my whole house of cards went pfft. I'm talking about this because as we close out June, Pride Month, if I'm honest, I wake up every single day wondering if this is going to be the day that I get arrested or have my life taken apart because I'm trans or get killed. While I don't get as much hate as a lot of people do, I do get some online, and today's politics are making it dramatically worse. This government is actively trying to kill people like me, and every day I'm hearing about more killings or suicides of people in my community, and it hurts. I'm obviously more than my gender. I am... everybody's more than their gender. And I wanted to share this because it's important for people to understand that your gender is intrinsically tied to you. You know, it's a big part of who I am, even if it's not the only part of who I am. One's gender and sexuality inform a large percentage of their identity. You know, I talk a lot about what I am, what else I am on the regular too. You know, I'm an author, I'm an editor, I'm a spouse, brother, son, TTRPG nerd, musician, martial artist, historian, watercolor painter. If you're reading this on Substack, or you'll see the picture up above that I did. That's one of my watercolor abstracts that I did recently. I'm a Christian. There's a lot of things that I am, and part of that is, of course, my gender and my sexuality and who I'm attracted to, but it's not the only thing. But in this world where those particular parts of me are under attack, I need to talk about them more than I usually would. Nobody really wants to kill me because I do watercolor painting or ban me for editing. I mean, most people aren't. There are probably some people out there who do. I mean, I did deal with a guy who was threatening me because I'm an editor and he didn't like it, but that's a different story. At the end of the Pride Month this year, as this goes out, it's the 30th. I wonder whether or not there will be a Pride Month next year. And if there is a Pride Month next year, will I be here to see it? I'm hoping so. I've got plans, I've got things I want to do next year, but I'm afraid of whether or not they will actually happen. I'm afraid of whether or not next year I'll be in a concentration camp for being queer or trans or neurodivergent. I'm wondering if we will have a country at all, or just pieces of one. For hope and comfort, I look back to the queer elders who were around during the AIDS pandemic. They went to the funerals during the day, and in the morning and at night they danced, and they loved each other in defiance of death and the government. Stonewall was a riot. I know people have survived worse than this before, and I never thought I'd have to be one of those people. I'm hoping that there is a Pride next year. I'm hoping I will be here to see it next year. I have every intent to be, but as this year Pride closes, for the first time in 40 years, I wonder if there will be one next year, or if I will be here to be a part of it. If this has reached you in any way, if this has spoken to your heart in any way, please share this message with others and help the trans community. In the middle of Pride Month this year, the government cut funding for trans youth and LGBTQ youth from the National Suicide Hotline, so they can call the suicide hotline, but there aren't people specially trained to help them there. The Trevor Project is trying to fill in the difference. They're trying to pass legislation to go after doctors who perform any kind of trans health care, which means I may or may not be able to get health care for some things in the future. Whether and it's not, anyway, there's constant and relentless attacks on my community. There are trans people dying in record numbers by suicide. We are getting murdered at a higher rate than we were before. When I leave my house, if I'm not armed, I'm scared. And even if I am armed, I'm scared. And I'm trained. I don't just carry weaponry because I'm scared. I know what I'm doing with it. I've been handling weapons since I was 6. But I can't help but worry about the people who aren't like me. The people who would be more vulnerable. And most of those people are trans women. Trans men tend to vanish because nobody usually knows that we're transmasculine. I usually get scanned as female, but just let people know about what we're going through. If you have trans friends, understand that we're terrified right now, all the time. And give us some care and some support and compassion. I hope you can forgive the light flickering in the video if you're watching this. We have our air conditioners running, and so the power kind of dims and such. It gets weird. But it's 103 out, so, we're not gonna be without it. The end of this kind of fell apart. I don't really have a lot to add here, but share this with people, let people know, and help us fight to have a Pride next year. Thanks for listening. Next week, we'll be back to book stuff.